Welcome everybody to this evening's session. I'll hand over to Amber in a moment to talk about what she's doing. And then we will, after about 25 minutes of that, move into dialogue between all of us. Amber, are you ready to kick off? Perhaps say a few words that you would like everybody to know about yourself, and then dive into what you want to talk about.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, everyone, for taking the time out of your day to be here and to devote time and energy to learning more about the movement that we're embedded in. So thank you. I first just want to take a moment of silence to have some gratitude for our ancestors and for the future ones that are to come after us. And I invite some of my ancestors into this space now as I'm presenting and sharing the work that is from a lineage of care, that their active stewardship and care made it possible for me to be here. So I want to acknowledge that first. Yeah, so it's really great. The more that I've been finding out about the FairShares Commons and Rebuild, some incredible resonance there, particularly around the need for an economics that is robust. And I almost think of it in terms of biodiversity. It's like, economically speaking, we've only been growing corn or something like that. And to create a robust economy, we need to be growing multiple different things, not just a monocrop. And fiat currency is kind of the monocrop. So to have healthy soils, to have healthy people, we need to have different things growing, different types of capital. But I call it equity because capital, I think, it can be problematic because it leads people to think about capitalism. So anyways, so yeah, I'm really grateful just to be able to be here. I'm gonna go into what I'm gonna share and talk about. I started off as an artist. I graduated from Arts and Ecologic Design in 2005. And then a couple of years after that, I very swiftly switched into studying sustainability on the background and peer-to-peer networks and crowdfunding and that sort of thing, and researching that. And the work that I'm here to present today came out of that pivot in my career of shifting into these crises that we're kind of facing as a species, and how can I use my creative capacities to think about that. So Graham, if it's all right, I'll go ahead and share screen. So yeah, the regenerative footprint is something that I came about intuitively some years ago, probably around 2015 or so. I realized that the way that we're thinking about the footprint in general in terms of a carbon footprint is incomplete, that we need to be looking at the whole interdependent human experience and realizing that we are actually a keystone species. We, like beavers, we're supposed to be embedded in ecology and stewards of it. And so our economies and our societies are interdependent with ecology. And so we need to have a systemic response to that. And that systemic response is what I call the regenerative footprint. So what is at the core and foundation of the regenerative footprint is something called intergenerational equity. So this is the innate wealth which exists in deep time as clean air, pure water, healthy soils, a livable climate, and original heirloom living codices of DNA for plants, animals, and ourselves. In this context, it's a premise of supporting a theory of value for the circulation of diversified forms of equity or holistic economic commons. In our living indigenous cultures on Turtle Island, these values are called circle of law, or living 7 generations without harm. So in considering how human beings can be a keystone species again, it seemed critical to look at occasions and incidents where the culture was intact, that it was alive. And indigenous living cultures, that's why they call it living, is because their version of the church and the university and the government and the hospital all occurred embedded in ecology. So there was no such thing to have a culture that evolved while nature degraded. And this is a really important thing to consider because we need to have the design foresight in the way that we're rethinking economies to be able to consider our impacts of future generations, so that when we circulate ideas, for example, the combustion engine mismanaged the flows of carbon on the planet. And if they were thinking with foresight or had a knowledge or insight around ecology, then that might not have transpired, or that may have been a design limitation to the circulation of that idea. Now, when I say equity, some people say capital, but I say equity. I mean different forms of benefit as they refer to natural equity, or it can be human equity, or different types of benefit, whether that's ecologically or socially or economically. And these are different examples of how we can diversify and create robust economies that are not just about transactions, but are about relationships. Let's see. So bioremediation, in case that word isn't clear, just means being able to clean or clean up pollution, for example, healing soils, or perhaps a device that might be able to take the plastics at the cellular level out of water so that it's no longer being circulated throughout the watershed. That has immense value. Okay, so part of the other component of what is at the foundation of the regenerative footprint is human agency. So an orchestra, a restaurant, dinner time, a film set, this is when our collaboration creates a property that exceeds any one individual's single capacity. This is also called emergence. If we were able to have a robust economy that was able to circulate multiple forms of equity without a kind of dissonance, meaning not just financial capital, not just fiat currency, to the degradation of an ecology, for example, that creates an equitable dissonance, as I call it. But to weave in a way of showing up in the world where we're in integrity with ourselves, with future generations, and with the planet. And I think that it's not just going to be one person, not going to just be one or a few series of companies. It'll have to be all of us, all hands on deck, doing this at different scales. And that's only possible through emergence. In this plural theory of value, it becomes possible to circulate all of these different types of equities in service to the restoration of the planet, healing our relationships to one another, and a path to mitigating compounded crisis points from planetary thresholds to create a just transition into the Symbiocene is the goal of this. And what is the Symbiocene? So the Symbiocene is something that was proposed by Glenn Albrecht after looking at people like Lynn Margulis and symbiogenesis. It's proposing that we exit the Anthropocene being the age in which the human impact on the planet shapes the age and era in a detrimental way. And so the Symbiocene is the opposite of that. It means, how do we affirm our interconnectedness with life and living things as an age? So for the system I'm proposing, I'm considering proposing something called open access, which is like open source with the engine of pay it forward connected. As communities harness their own agency, they can seed other communities that are interested in having this. So it's not prescriptive. In the diverse circulation of equity types, the sovereign rights of nature is a functional aspect of this pay it forward. So you can say, oh, that nature has rights, or that water has rights, but it's just words unless it's being actionable, unless it's functional as our sharing and not just stewardship of it, because it's moving out of and stepping out of the scarcity mindset that nature nature is an infinite game. It's not a finite game. So these are some of the different capacities that communities might be able to orchestrate with having a robust economy that's diverse, and it's not just about transactions, but is about relationships again. So interrelated basic needs, formerly known as Maslow's hierarchy of needs, food, water, shelter, sanitation, that sort of thing. Local organic food sovereignty, cradle to cradle processes. This just means there's no waste, there's no pollution that exists. We're able to have circulate commodities, for example, where there's no byproduct that cannot be reabsorbed by the ecosystem. These are all sort of self-explanatory, holistic birthing centers. Flow states, that means when you're able to enter into a way of being that is really highly potent. And ecstasis is when multiple people can do this at the same time. So this might be what it looks like for over a city. So if this sort of thing is mapped, this is what it might look like for a 24-hour period for a single small town or city. And these are the different equity points in flux that are being broadcast. We'll get into that a little bit. But I call that open mutual access. Each person, entity, organization, and company circulates several forms of equity. And how can this be visible? If human agency in service to life had a means of broadcasting these patterns, then communities can see what's working and adopt if they feel inspired. So it's more orchestrated and visible. So when those different forms of equity are in flux, they show up in their communities as the previous slide was showing. But cumulatively, all of those equity types feed into a meta one, a Gaian one, the larger one. And those show up as these little lines on the outside of the planet. Now, if you see the purple lines in between them, that's when multiple forms of equity are linked together through a single thing. So the goal of RG Footprint is to go purple all the way around the planet. And the purple acts behind them represent multiple kinds of equity in a single broadcast. An example of this might be a clothing brand made with reconciliation intentions in Bangladesh at the former site of Rana Plaza, which collapsed. Owned by women, using carbon farming, designed with slow fashion standards, with Thrive trade practices and eco-zero waste processes. And perhaps through the sale of these garments, they could have, for example, holistic education from the proceeds. These are just examples. They might choose birthing centers, who knows? But it's just a concept that through purchasing a jacket made by them with slow fashion, meaning it's made to last at least a decade, you could be participating in multiple forms of benefits in a single experience or a single purchase. So the thickness of these larger thicknesses of lines translates out into larger eggs. And these these large circles are showing at scale the human agency. So if we were looking at this and give any given time in the year, it would show us, oh, there's a lot of agency or resources around regenerative education nests or organic hyperlocal food sovereignty. So it's showing the scale at which these things are happening around the planet. And so it's for comparative scale volume. And this is a desktop version. It wouldn't be on an app or anything. So I hear you talk about autopoiesis all the time, Graham. I'm totally on board with that. I just call it sacred autopoiesis because the work of engaging in these heirloom practices of compassion for future generations for benefits that we will never see is also at the same time inheriting the care and compassion that our ancestors took for us to be here and to come into the stewardship process ourselves. And when this system is successful, its goal is to be obsolete. Its goal is to be obsolete so that there's such an embeddedness and an aliveness of cultures that you don't need any kind of technology like it. So the point is to, at least step one, is to create a wire framework that is open sourced as a kind of, to create this ecosystem for incubators, for entities, ideas, and visions to intersect. and to operate with sovereignty. I think that's important more than any one entity or concept as I'm collaborating with these other people like Graham or the Open Futures Coalition. And my question is, how can our cooperation as a mycelial network or behavior in our agency create this? So what I'm offering is the regenerative footprint framework as the base, or intergenerational equity as the base, and then a process of these hubs that are kind of like incubation hubs, as local community spaces that I've entitled the Tender Heart Principle. And what works symbiotically with them is the regenerative education hub, Kinfinity, which means infinite kinship with all life. You can find that on my website. But these two programs are interdependent because you have to have regenerative education for youth. And at the same time, you have to have the culture that is supporting that. You can't have one, or you can't have education without an appropriate culture that allows people to evolve. Because if you have kids that are enacting these evolved ways of showing up in the world, while their families or communities are still like not able to integrate what's being learned, there's just going to be more tension in the home. So that's kind of an independent thing. Then subsequently, what can come out of that are stewardship initiatives by those communities. I think that water has the most precedence, that water needs to be the very first stewardship initiative that comes above all other ones. And then things like the development of the app, like I'm describing, or regenerative patents or business incubations can happen subsequently after that. Now, this is, these ideas are more like templates. I describe them as templates. So if you had a Kinfinity hub or a Tender Heart Principle hub, it wouldn't be called that. It's not Starbucks. It's not trying to brand itself. That's just the name of the template. It's meant for a local community to have its inception point and naming process for them. So if it was in South Africa, for example, they might call it Ubuntu Center or whatever. In Japan, that might be Kaizen, or who knows what it is, or it's really offering them as templates to be used, kind of like the reflectors on a highway. Nobody knows the name of the brand of the reflectors. They're just aware that they work and that they exist. So thank you so much. That concludes my presentation. That's the Sensorio art installation that I went to in Paso by Bruce Monroe. And I just wanted to end it with that possibility of immersion into art and the immersion into what each of us has to offer with potency. So thank you so much.
I'll say a couple of, we'll draw a couple of links between what Amber has been saying and our work and our book, Rebuild, which summarizes everything. And then I'll hand over to Jack to say a few more things from his perspective as a professional economist. Although
just don't hold that against me. That's yes. What I do for a living.
Exactly. Consider Jack as a recovering professional economist. So, there's a lot that Amber has said that really connects very strongly with everything that we're up to. And for the benefit of people who've not been in one of our earlier webinars who haven't read the book, what we're up to, and one of the core themes running through the entire book is that if we want to build a global economy that works, global ecosystems, global society, we need to do something that is coherent, that is integrated across all 6 strata here. And each stratum is itself an ecosystem. So the reason why so many initiatives up until now have fallen far short of what we need is that they're working at just 1 or 2 strata. We're raising individual consciousness, stratum 1, but we're not really touching how organizations are structured. Or we touch how organizations are structured and operated, sociocracy, holacracy, etc. But we don't change stratum 4, how they're incorporated, or we don't do something that is coherent and strong enough in stratum 2, how people interact, or stratum 1, our own internal self-development. So a big theme of the book and what we're up to in our startup factory is a coherent approach across the first four. And a key element in our approach is the FairShares Commons incorporation, which is designed to transcend and include the best of the limited company, the cooperative, the multi-stakeholder cooperative, the steward-owned companies, the public benefit corporations, to include all of that and go beyond in the sense that, first of all, it's designed for all capitals with representatives of all capitals involved. So it's really perfectly designed for what Amber's pointing at as a building block to build that. A core part of the FairShares Commons is the role of stewards, and the stewards have to vote according to the needs of the next 7 generations. Everybody else is encouraged to take that into account, but the stewards have to. So the 7 generations is built in there. I think it was in webinar 3 or 4, we talked about how the nature of the FairShares Commons incorporation naturally leads to deep connections between the different companies, forming a level of deep trust between the companies in a circular economy or a regenerative economy. And part of that is because capitals flow from one company to another in their native units. Again, very much what Amber was talking about, this imperative to have, as Amber put it, where I wrote it down somewhere, linking multiple equities in a single broadcast. Well, to the extent that I understand exactly what Amber means by that, the FairShares Commons is designed to enable that to happen. So, there are multiple areas where we connect, and we also connect, for example, these 6 layers. I see a lot of common ground between these 6 strata, each of them as an ecosystem, and what Amber was pointing at as ourselves as a keystone species. And we need to look at the full footprint, not just sub-footprints. It's the same essence that we're pointing at here. Your open access, well, a big part of the FairShares Commons incorporation, because all stakeholders get a share of the wealth generated across all of the capitals. It provides a mechanism for that open access, paying it forwards. And embedded in the FairShares Commons is also elements of, I would tend to prefer the word free rather than open source, because open source just means I can access it, but free and open source means that it's truly free of possession. And that's a key thing in the FairShares Commons as well. It's an incorporation that truly recognizes the company as a person, and that any application of any kind of property to a company prevents the company from truly doing what we need it to do in today's age. And we dive into that in detail as well, and we can talk more in a moment. Right, I will stop talking at that point. There are lots of other videos from our previous recordings on our YouTube channel if you want to dive into more discussion on that than we cover into this evening or today's session here. The one thing that we haven't covered is where Amber started, and I'll hand over to Jack to say a few things about that. In the appendix of our book, we pick up on how we can rebuild economics, recognizing what Amber said, that the economy today and economics theory is as if the only thing we did was plant maize or corn, a monocrop economy. Jack.
Yes, well, good morning, everybody. Or evening, and I really like your presentation, Amber. Everything was really well thought out, and I was looking at each particular slide. I said, wow, I mean, this is really good, and I could dwell on this the rest of the afternoon. And also, what I liked about your presentation was everything was interconnected. And that's what we're all about. That's what our book is about, the interconnectedness of us and reality and all of us together. And I really, really appreciated that. I also really liked, and I think this might be just a good idea for all of us to do, and it might be a way of surmounting the obstacles that are in the way of doing something. And I really like beginning your presentation with a moment of silence, and not just directed at the present, but for those of us in the past and those of us in the future. Because this is the essence of what the book is about. This is the essence of what your presentation is about. And this is the essence of what we're all doing, is this lineage with the past and the present. This is the nature of and the essence of sustainability. And I really like that. And I would like to start doing that on my own, because I think it really puts us into the right frame of mind. And you guys were laughing at autopoiesis, and I would just like to mention that we do in our book, we have 3, not just 1, not just 2, but 3 index references with that. And I'm very proud of that. It's you're asking me to do, I think, what is the impossible, and that is looking at ways of rebuilding our economic system in just a couple of minutes. I mean, we basically, this is why I'm devoted my life to do this. And, you know, I can just give us maybe the essence of the essence, or the quintessence. We really need to do this. I would simply argue that the economic system, and not just the economic system, but the way of thinking economically. This is rooted, maybe that's not the best word, maybe it's, well, lack of a better word, it's rooted in the 19th century. And the 19th century linear binary thinking, this is the essence of our economic system. And what we have to do is we have to redo, rebuild, reconceptualize. I would need at least an hour to go over the essence of this. It's difficult to put this in really just a couple of minutes, but if I could do this, Amber, what I really liked, where did I go? I did write it down. You mentioned that, you know, this essence of human agency and the discipline of economics. It's always rebelled against this, arguing that, you know, the members of the economic profession were the elites, and everybody has to do what we advise. And I do like that, but you also mentioned that it's this notion of equity. This is all about building relationships and not just about transactions. In the 19th century, when we do get the development of the traditional economics that's out there, that's all around us, it developed over this notion that when there is a transaction between A and B, this is the essence of an economic relationship and the discipline of economics. And I think what you said, that's very good, because that gets at the root, I think, of what is wrong with our economic system. And, you know, I really wanted to keep this a secret, but Graham leaked it out of the bag that, yes, I am an economist, member of the economics profession. Don't hold that against me. You know, I like to laugh and do other down-to-earth things, but it's my life focus. And this is one reason why Graham and I met, which is just by accident, but my life's objective is this regenerative education. And I'm really glad that you mentioned this. And it's this is something that's absolutely necessary. Even those of us who aren't educators, just officially, we can do this on our own with everyone in our circle. And it is the goal of these circles will overlap and intersect, as you nicely diagrammed. Don't get me going on this. I could really literally go on for an hour, and I would rather just defer and let anybody else speak. I'm always willing to maybe butt in with anything about economics. I do think this is very, very critical, and maybe, as Graham mentioned, it is at the end of the book, but this is also the basis of our next book. And we're already working on that now. What's the best way of redoing or rebuilding or reconceptualizing our economic system? And it isn't easy. What makes it difficult is that there's lots of obstacles. I mean, the obstacles are, I think, very formidable. And this is why, I really like this nice beginning with a moment of silence. I think we need a lot more of that. And we need the ability of listening, reflecting, and dialogue. Each of these elements, I think, are integral in rebuilding, and each of these elements are integral in rebuilding a workable, for all, and sustainable economic system. I wrote, right before I met Graham, I wrote an economics textbook to do precisely that. And Rebuild picks up where I left off. And our next book will be picking up literally where Rebuild ends. And I would just like to leave it at that. And once again, Amber, I really appreciated your discussion and what you offer. And I would agree with Graham, where there is significant overlaps, particularly on this notion of capital and equity. And I also like this, I also wrote this down that I really liked. And you mentioned that each person, each entity, each organization, each company is, and I forgot the word you used, but is emitting, is possessing different types of capital. I think that's also very, very critical.
The plan is for about another 35 minutes, maybe 40 minutes, open dialogue. And I suggest we stay together as a group, and then we'll wrap up for 5 minutes at the end. That will be the formal close. But from that point on, whoever wants to hang around and continue chatting is welcome to hang around and continue chatting, somewhat as if we were meeting face to face and all heading off afterwards to a cafe or a bar somewhere and continuing to chat.
That would be nice.
Yes. So who would like to kick off with a question to Amber, a comment, some tangential build, anything to get the conversation going?
Or any critiques too. Totally open to that too. That's where it's actually very helpful. This part was very nebulous and unclear.
I'll jump in with a comment, if that's
Please
okay.
do, Freeman. Thank you.
Yeah, well, I think I want to say, Amber, absolutely brilliant. That was an excellent presentation. Obviously, you've put an incredible amount of thought into the structures and what's needed, and that you spent. So have you spent quite a few years working on like the various pieces of this?
Yeah, it's something that started off very small and then snowballed into this massive research project, and then sort of figure out how could it be developed. At some point, I think 5 years into it, I thought that it should be a nonprofit, and then I realized that there's this thing called the nonprofit industrial complex. I sort of realized that that there are entities in the world that are working for business only, and the fallout of that is ecological degradation, social degradation, extraction. The fallout of that is picked up by the nonprofit industrial complex. So the breakdown of societies or infrastructures, social duress, ecological issues, biodiversity loss is all picked up by this problem. And so I kind of backed up and then came to center again and looked at these ideas. So they just kept evolving from that way, from just figuring out insights about our world and how interdependent it is, and I found out about systems theory and all these things that came afterwards.
No, very good. Excellent. No, I really appreciate it. I wasn't sure what to expect today during the conversation, but an excellent presentation. And then maybe just to kind of what, before I let go of my turn here, to what Jack was saying in terms of the economic, changes that are needed. That's something that I see as well as, we need to move from, the single capital system to recognize multiple capitals. But then ultimately, I think what we need to get to is just time. Like it's that's the main thing that we can all contribute as humans is time, our own time. But we need a structured system to catch the existing system and funnel it through some sort of filter and transference process to eventually get to that point. And so I'm looking forward to future discussions with all of you here. Well, thank you.
Thank you, Freeman. Who would like to pick up the microphone next?
Charles here. I'd love to hear a little bit more, Amber or anyone, on the symbiocene, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Charles. Amber.
Yeah, the symbiocene, so it comes from symbiogenesis. There's a botanist, I think it was 17th, 18th century, that coined the term specifically symbiosis or symbiogenesis in reference to biological processes. And then that was later picked up again by, I don't know the first name of Schofield, but Lynn Margulis, and then was coined in 2011 by Glenn A. Albrecht. So it comes from an immediate deviation, an inverse of the Anthropocene. So to describe what the symbiocene is, we need to ask, what is the Anthropocene? So it's a description of the age at which human beings have an epoch or an era of impact on the planet that is not exactly good. So as a reaction, he came up with the symbiocene. So he's suggesting that, and I can post the article, I'll post the article in the chat too, so you can check it out. But he was suggesting that human beings enter the Anthropocene only very briefly to figure out that, oh, okay, we are integrated with the planet. These are our impacts. These are the feedback loops of it. And we very quickly deviate into the symbiocene, coming into symbiotic relationships with life, with animals, with plants, versus degradational, extractive, and with entropy. So it's the description of the age that humanity enters into as an age of care, of stewardship, of, harmonic relationships or synarchic relationships versus degradational ones. I hope that answers.
Perfect. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Amber. Diane, would you be willing to come in and say a few things from your perspective around how shipping, long distance ocean transport could change to support what Amber is pointing at, what we're describing in the book, that arena?
Very short answer to that, Graham. No. But I really, really appreciate the book. I'm learning a lot about how to think about things differently. And Amber, I really appreciated your presentation enormously. And with every slide, with every sentence in the book, I'm thinking, how do we apply this to the shipping industry that I understand? And because it's so international and so fragmented, it's really challenging to think about, how do we interrelate? So we've got a global interconnector here with shipping, and it is pretty much divorced from most of our experienced lives. So it goes kind of, it's like an outlaw nation. There's a writer called Ian Urbina who refers to it as an outlaw state. So primarily it's driven by really old capitalist models, mostly men, mostly white men, and there's a lot of subterfuge, and I have no real idea how we can start to be more symbiotic in that really fragmented international system. I mean, it's just quite baffling. I don't really know where to start, and it's that thing that I can't remember who said it was, that every time you pull one bit of the system, another bit of it breaks somewhere else. So I'm at the moment, what I'm on is a fact-finding mission of thinking about other ways of being, other ways of existing. And I'm really taken by the idea of the monoculture. You know, the idea that there's an economic system which is a monoculture. That was just fabulous, opening a door in my mind. So thank you so much for that, Amber. And we'll think, you know, I'm just kind of absorbing as much as I can about other ways of approaching the world and thinking about how we can integrate that into shipping. And indeed, if we can, or whether we have to redesign the whole system, which is where I'm sort of ending up at the moment.
Thank you.
I'd love to add something to that. I've actually thought about how could weapons companies or oil companies shift. Joanna Macy says something to the extent of like, there may be a time when companies take a hard look at what they're doing and come to realize that they can keep their transportation and communication infrastructures and cast off everything else, possibly. Buckminster Fuller says that we need to shift from weaponry to livingry. And I love that. I think it's a very simple sentence, but straight to the point. And I think that the infrastructures of these large companies, conglomerates even, that are engaging in either socially, ecologically, or economically degradational practices or extractive practices, or ones that create duress and chaos in the world, can look at what they're doing and pivot to make decisions that are supporting life. So how could we have these things that I'm talking about, like biodigesters to every community or microgrids to every community, to make them have more integrity, to be local in terms of their energy infrastructures or sanitation infrastructures, so that they're localized? That is the shift from weaponry to livingry. If they were about that, if they were about the process of installing or shipping these capacities for local communities to be resilient in that way, that's a complete shift. And I've really been dreaming about that too. When they make that shift, these big companies, to do something that's more life affirming, the percentages of what they're doing can go to other companies to make that transition as well, like transitional subsidies.
Yeah, and shall we, is that okay, everybody? But I think you're absolutely right. I just don't know how to reach. So the industry is made up of multiple small players, but they are degenerative and chaotic. And I don't know how to reach a critical mass where we could get to pivot the culture, if you like, that exists. And if that and so I'm kind of with Fuller on this, on, you know, we perhaps have to redesign the system from a different perspective. And I think that might be a perspective of a new economy, a new way of thinking about the world, because I mean, the global shipping system is powered by extractive, cheap fossil fuels, and we all benefit from it, and none of us really appreciate it. I mean, most of the computers that we're joined on this call have been facilitated by cheap shipping, with one element being moved around the world to facilitate another bit, that ultimately the whole lot comes to our desk at a price that we can all afford. So that's got some really valuable ways of connecting us, but I think it's the power that we are using, which is extractive, that we can rethink, and that those alternative power solutions have not yet been invented. And so until that happens, I'm not entirely convinced that I can find a way to pivot even one individual. That, you know, it's really, I'm having a bit of a bad day, so this is a really great day to be here, so to sort of get some more inputs into the thinking.
Diane, one thought that might be helpful there, and we dive into this a bit in the book. One of the key insights in the transition in South Africa from apartheid South Africa into the first stage of a post-apartheid South Africa was the recognition that actually very few of the players in any of the, let's say, sides in apartheid were fundamentally malevolent.
Mm-hmm.
What was actually the issue is that normal people were embedded in a system that was malevolent. And that recognition that actually almost all of us are victims of a malevolent system rather than inherently malevolent people opened a lot of doors to find viable paths from where South Africa was down the first few steps towards a transformed South Africa. And I have a strong suspicion that this is part of this is one of the lenses that we need to make this kind of transition, is to accept that, well, it's taking really seriously the idea that there's not actually much difference between us. Yeah, that whether you're male, female, whatever the superficial difference, there's far more in common that unites us. And that the same might be true for people who are currently deep in an extractive business, that they might actually have more in common with us than we realize, and they're embedded in a dysfunctional system. So part of what we're trying to do, and you know, with our work in our regenerative startup ecosystem factory that, you know, works across all layers here, is to come in with that paradigm, build a system that works better, but in a way that recognizes that we're all subject to the system we're embedded in, rather than a, yeah, I'll stop talking at that point.
No, I completely agree, and with one or two exceptions, I haven't met a malevolent actor. They're all good people, and they all want to make a change, but they're locked into this system, and that not one element of the ecosystem has the power to change until all of it does, and so that's a task that which we're trying to figure out, whether we have to do it at that massive scale or whether we can do it at a more of a homeopathic scale, where you demonstrate a new system and then hope that seeds and takes root across the wider infrastructure. But,
yes.
Yeah, it's really fascinating, but I completely agree, and that apartheid model is really helpful to me.
Excellent. And yeah, that's certainly our focus, is in the sense of, if we build something that is coherent across the first 5 strata here, from each individual's inner ecosystem up to local economic ecosystems, that provides the foundation for something that can then scale. So, you know, my sense is, it doesn't matter how small the new system is that we build. It can be a very small toy system, but it's really important for people to, number one, see that nobody's blaming them for being victims of the current system, that we recognize that. Number two, what a new viable system might look like, even if it's a very small toy prototype. And that opens up a lot of energy and hope of, we can scale and grow that quite quickly and build a completely new system, which is then the third thing, that people see a path from where we are now to the new viable system that we want to get to. And I think that's one of the big issues today, and which is why I was so excited when I met Amber and saw her work, is that it sheds a complementary light to ours on what the new system might look like and the viable path to get there from where we are now.
Completely.
I think that Mike also has his hand raised.
Yes, I see that. Mike, would you like to come in next?
Thank you, Graham. So first of all, congrats on the book. I'm a huge fan. What I find amazing about it is that it's exactly what you said. I think it invites you to action, and is actually small changes and adjustments which can, because I think, you know, these meta narratives, they're being constructed all the time, right? And the complexity is only increasing. And so if we have the prepotency to think that we know what the solutions are at the bigger scale, that's just, you know, it's much more about the learning process, I guess. It's about starting somewhere, right? And what I like about the approach that you suggest, and that really was one of, I would say, because I'm kind of was for a long time in this integral movement, and trying to apply, you know, the teal type of thinking and human organizations, more human approach to doing business, conscious capitalism and this and that. But I felt like there was this huge gap, you know, missing, and I got to you through the meta modern community and through purpose economy. And so what I find about it, the simplicity, and I think it's really about, this is when the collective comes in place, because we'll have to construct this together and invite all these narratives and include all the narratives, right? And if we think that, you know, about the complexity, that can be very paralyzing, because it's just, the problems are so big, right, in the world, and we have to start somewhere. And so this just wanted to contribute to the conversation, and then ask you, actually, I reached out to you on LinkedIn, whether there is a place that I could maybe speak to someone from the team, because I know that you guys are running in January the new cohort. But so just to introduce myself, I'm a Slovakian entrepreneur living in Brazil, and I built a business for the past 5 years, where, as I said, I've been trying to apply a lot of these you know, conscious capitalism values, let's say. But I'm creating another company right now, and I'm literally at the stage of incorporation. And so I read your book, I read the purpose economy guide they have on their website, and I do have a few questions. And so I was just wondering whether there is anyone from your team that I could just have a chat with, because I probably won't be able to wait until January to get into the cohort, because I'm literally like about to open the company, and yeah, so that's it. So thank you for the space, and happy to be here.
Excellent. Thank you for that, Mike. Appreciate that. Yes, we'll follow up with you on what we can do. We do run FairShares Commons workshops specifically about learning how the FairShares Commons works. and guiding you through the process of designing a FairShares Commons company. And we are planning to run one of those workshops during Q3 this year. So that may be an option, or we set up something special for you. That's always an option as well. So we'll follow up on that. What I would suggest is also, I'm not very good with LinkedIn messages. Drop me an email, graham@evolute6.com, and I'll pass that on to the appropriate person. So, is there somebody who has something that they would like to bring in? If not, I'm going to poke at somebody.
Graham, I would like to share something.
Go for it.
I am a slow thinker, so I really admire people that can say, oh, this relates to this part of Amber's presentation. There was something that I took from there, but I cannot pinpoint it, but I want to relate it to Diane and the way she spoke and the way she openly show us her feelings about this issue that is concerning her. And I want to talk about that as an example of all of us who look at us, because I think we are trying to do a lot of things, very complex things. We know we have very little time, and this raises a lot of emotions. But we have the answers. Diane, while you were speaking, you were just opening a space with your questions, with all of that you mentioned, like you were making an inventory of what is not very well working at the shipping system. But if you consider your words, you were opening, with your questions, you were opening a space. The universe is gonna immediately fill that with the answers. You already have the answers. But it is so huge what we are undertaking right now as humanity, that emotions and fear arises. So it's very important that we take into account that probably the basic cells that will change the system, not companies, not anything else, but us as human beings. If we see ourselves with compassion and take into account that we have these feelings arising and manage those feelings, we will be able to pass that moment and find what we really are facing. And to me, it seems it's the whole system that we need to redesign. I don't see how the shipping system, just to take that example, can be developed into something else. We need something completely different because it's embedded in the larger system. It's not only the shipping system, but the whole commerce and production system that is there. So just to summarize, let's go back and look at ourselves with compassion and recognize that we are very courageous to be undertaking all of this. The work that Amber did to gather all this information, to start dreaming. I'm pretty sure she needed to be very courageous to face all these, but we can do it. We just need to be compassionate to ourselves. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Roberto. After Freeman, I would be curious of any thoughts from you linking the work you've been doing over the past few years and what we've been talking about. But to give you some time to think of, let me jump to Freeman first.
Yeah, just to your comments there, Roberto, when you're talking about the need for the entire system to change, I just kind of want to talk on that really briefly. But before I do, I want to thank you for acknowledging the fact that we need to create that space with one another, because it is emotional, right? Ultimately, all of us are stuck in a system that is really in managing our own survival on this planet and the world, right? So, so I think the fact that we need to acknowledge that space for each other, for, for transition, for all of that is super important. So I think kind of in line with that, to your comment about the fact that we need a new global system, absolutely. The biggest point of resistance of any change is the existing system itself, right? All of the major capital is stuck in a system. So I think that's the point I just wanted to acknowledge is, as we're pushing through this transition, whatever that looks like, I think it's about also holding space for that existing capital, for that existing system, right? To say, this isn't so scary. There's still a way out of this in the end. You can reinvest your billions in this direction, but we need to hold that space for them as well. So I just wanted to throw that comment into the mix, and thank you for that comment. Yeah.
Yeah, I would just like to add something, and I appreciate that, Freeman, and something you mentioned that really struck me, Roberto, is that you prefaced your remarks by stating that you're a slow thinker, and there's nothing wrong with that. I love that word. That's what I am. I'm also a slow writer. I never could be a journalist, and I welcome that. I think we also need more of that. And maybe just to get back to something that Freeman just mentioned, it isn't, it's not just the system that is at fault, but it's the people, the vested interest. This is something that Jared Diamond wrote a lot about, those people that benefit directly from the system as it's working now. This is another reason why we wrote our book, Rebuild. It's a point of maybe segueing or maybe entering their mindset and saying, well, look, what we're offering might even benefit you. And I think that's necessary. In other words, We're not throwing out the bath with the baby, or whatever, the water with the bath. But anyway.
Great. Ulf, and then David. I noticed, David, you have your hand up. Would you be willing to say a few thoughts, Ulf, and you're on mute?
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Graham. It's really great to see you again. What a wonderful occasion here with this fantastic book presentation that I wasn't aware of, and I really enjoy the inspiration. There's lots of things I can say yes to, like many of the things that have been said here already in this short workshop. What I might like to add as a perspective is around how I believe the shift really needs to happen on the inside of us. So obviously we can point to faulty systems, bad people, whatever we may have on our mind, but I believe that one of the really fundamental questions that really also haven't yet been fully addressed is how we view the world, what people believe, what matters in life, or what makes us a good human. And I believe that the work we have ahead of us here in terms of getting ahead also with the SDGs is how can we learn as societies to change our beliefs about the world? So how liberating it feels to connect with people, to open up to each other, to lower our masquerade that we have normally in interacting with each other in society, in politics, in any kind of leadership board at a normal company. And we all have these experiences, like opening up to the stranger kind of next to you on a plane or on a train. How liberating that can feel to make this profoundly humane experience of opening up to the person and feeling the connection, and learn as society to invite people and ourselves to connecting with ourselves, with like our beliefs, our childhood patterns, connect with each other and connect with the planet, and really from this empathy pull people into a new world and into their creativity and into learning from each other, rather than trying to push people by saying this is wrong. I think we will need to fight. This is where I really don't know at the moment, like maybe I'm just dreaming of pulling people into empathy and inviting people into empathy. I've just seen this work and most of the workshops I've been leading, how people open up quickly, strangers or people, colleagues at the same company, once you create a framework for them to feel the difference between what they believed they should kind of care for in life, like materialism, careers, this kind of stuff, versus what really matters, like connection, aliveness, play, deeper joy. So will we have to get ready to fight for a better world? I hope we don't. I hope it's going to be enough to really learn as society to learn connecting a lot easier and more. And from connecting comes collaboration, normally quite naturally. That's what I would probably just like to offer as an addition to what has been said. And yeah.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Ulf. And it's absolutely spot on. One of the central themes of the book is how the reality each of us experiences is to a very, very large extent our own individual unique reality that we create internally. So the entire part 3 of the book is dedicated to how can we learn who we are and increase our capacity to grow and transform who we are.
Yes.
And in fact, the appendix that Jack pointed to, we propose that economics ought to be based on the idea that, you know, of that reality is internal to each of us. Therefore, there are 7.9 billion different realities on the planet, that every decision that every person takes is perfectly rational within their inner reality at that moment. And therefore, what economics ought to be is the study of how to connect your reality and your rational with my reality and my rational. So, you know, there's a really clear link between, as you're saying, the need to transform ourselves at an inner individual level all the way up to the global macroeconomic scale. It's all connected.
It definitely is. And I really must read your book finally. And obviously, I haven't said anything new to anyone. It's just like, I think this internal, the kind of people's belief systems have, I just think they need to be called out. And personally, I do believe, yes, while it's all connected, the different levels, the global scale, planetary, as well as the individual, I think much of what people worldwide in the economy, at work, believe is just a few beliefs that kind of make or break our ecology. Like, is more always better? And these kind of fundamental beliefs that, or actually, are people competitors or potential collaborators? Yeah, these kind of deep beliefs, I think it's not that many. So we don't have 9 million perspectives, maybe we have a lot less, and they can be addressed. And I believe that this is driving much else, rather than trying to force systems to change top down, which normally hasn't happened. Because one last thing I want to also point out, it's so important to see how we all benefit from the current system, as somebody pointed out earlier, and how difficult it is to just believe that somebody at the top or somebody powerful should change the system. They won't, just because we all benefit. So how can we inspire to something even more kind of lovable than the current economy? Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Ulf. Actually, before we let go of you, you have a movie out and you also have a book, don't you? Do you want to say a couple of things about that?
Oh, sure. Thanks for asking. Actually, one movie and 2 books. Movie and first book quite interrelated. Book is called Management Why, like the letter Y, capital Y. Speaking more about theory why, by Doug McGregor, for those who know. So like, what drives people? Is it kind of, are people generally lazy and need kind of to be pushed? Or isn't it that all human beings rather contribute to something that's greater than themselves? And it's very much in line with what has been said here in this call, like offering different pathways, actually by practical experience that are kind of mine and the team and others, like what has gotten people change mindsets in an organization to start this conversation without anyone telling anyone what to think or what to do. So how can change grow organically? Second book was about mindsets, like how can mindsets change, again, based on experience and what has happened in management, in particular in organizations, for people to have space to reflect mindset. So a bit of what I shared earlier. And the film called Augenhöhe, which is German for On Equal Footing, is kind of just, it's a bit like a wildlife documentary. So we really kind of sat at companies with the camera, waiting for collaborative spirit to emerge in order to demonstrate in very ordinary industries like manufacturing, a hospital, to inspire people. Many people believe that the economy and organizations and bosses and leadership have always to be the way, like top down and so on. And we wanted to inspire them, hey, no. So much different and much more humane behavior is possible and is normal, and to show them how it feels. And the film has been, it's in German, but the film has been translated by the European Parliament Language Service into English subtitles as well. And you can still download it for free. It's been a crowdfunding campaign that funded it at augenhöhe-film.de. And actually on Vimeo. Augenhöhe, I put it in the chat and you can watch it on Vimeo. It's been viewed by many 100,000 people now because it's film and dialogue. The idea is not just watch the film and lean back and say I liked it, but rather like we have here, anyone who shows the film invites people to have dialogue afterwards, like what does it mean to you, what has touched you maybe, and this kind of dialogue only gives the film the power.
Excellent, thank you, Ulf. David, let's move over to you next, and then Amber, I would love it if you could take sort of 5 minutes or so to put in some thoughts from yourself to bracket what you brought in. But David Silverman first.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, loud and clear.
Good, yes. Thank you. Well, I guess I'm going to give a few sentences of a story and then ask for Amber for your feedback as well as for the hosts. I was struck, and I think there's a thread of a theme running through the discussion today about how much we trust or our fears or our hopes in terms of whether individuals and systems can respond fully with and rise to the level of the integrative visions that we hold. Amber, I had an experience at, I believe it was the 2006 Buckminster Fuller Institute, where a former mentee of Fuller spoke, who had been a C-suite executive in one of the Baby Bell companies. And much of his presentation there was something of a challenge to the design thinkers, asserting that many of the corporate leadership that he worked with were fully cynically manipulative and were by no means going to enact the values and designs that were being presented and endorsed. They knew the game they were playing and they were very good at it. What was interesting to me was the reaction of the audience, which was largely split. There was a large group of the audience and the people who believed in design as a solution, the carrot approach, I guess one might think of it as, who simply did not believe that that sort of leadership existed and that they had to deal with that level of mendacity. And then there was another part of the audience that had, I think, maybe more direct experience with corporate and political leadership that acted and came from that sort of set of assumptions and behaviors. What was amazing to me was the inability of these two camps at the conference to talk to each other about their different views. And moreover, to surface political and let's call it judicial or decision-making processes that might apply in a design science framework. So I wanted to put this to you about the political implications of these large-scale visions and detailed schematics that we're all attempting to propound. How do we build in the sort of assurance of trust, the corrective functions, and actual political organization? I mean, there certainly is a tendency amongst some people in these areas to eschew politics and say, if we have a good enough design attractor, people will come. And there are other people who are much more insistent on the need for direct democratic practice and for in your example of South Africa, not just truth and reconciliation commissions, but political reorganization of society. So I'm wondering how you regard the political implications of this, and within corporate design, organizational design. I'm struck that I certainly know in the 90s, and some of the systems work I was doing in the 80s and 90s, there were works that tried to put together systems models of cooperatives that included internal judiciary that would evaluate and decide and deprecate wrongful decisions. I'm wondering how all of that plays out at scale in these models. I hope that's clear as a set of concerns and a specific question. Thank you.
Beautiful. Thank you for that, David. Now, we're coming up to 5 minutes away from the scheduled end. That sounds like a very rich topic for those who want to hang around, and I hope you can for a bit afterwards, David, to dive into more depth than we can in the scheduled time. But Amber, I would love it if you could pick up on what David said, put in a few closing thoughts, and then Jack and myself will say a few things to wind things up, and then the space is open for the pub conversation afterwards. Amber.
Great. Sure. Yeah. So, David, to answer your question, what I've been seeing, and in terms of what's played out politically that I've been responding to, hasn't really been. It's more so been dreaming outside of the confines of patriarchy, of human supremacy, of white supremacy. It's a very decolonized lens. So in describing my response to colonized patterns, social patterns, they're not responses in a way to them, but they are. It's a conundrum. I'm really interested in joyful liberation, meaning like our capacity to show up in the world as fully ourselves, as if the universe dreamt the idea of who we were, each of us, as this potent labyrinth of joy. And that it's our job, I guess, on this earth to step into the essence of that thought that eternity thought of when it thought of us as individuals and how we connect with ourselves, with others, with the planet. And that's more rooted in spirituality than it is in social or political systems, because thought is always evolving. And so the human condition is always evolving. And my understanding of time is that time expands and contracts depending on one's consciousness. So the experience or the implications, let's say, of these ideas at scale is only ever implicated at the scale of the community. That's all. And that when these communities are able to connect to each other like a mycelial network, that's more so the vibe of what I'm engaging in or interested in that landscape. And the question of how can each of us show up with our essence or our capacities or ideas to show up in collaboration is that. And Ulf actually made a really fantastic point, which is that, and it actually really relates to Foucault. Foucault said that it may not be possible for institutions to house power because it's a dynamic of relationship. And so how do we show up in our relationships in the world will determine, the integrity of that will determine what our culture is and how that shows up. And so the social political systems have tended to be supremacy-based, predatory-based, competitive-based, neo-Darwinist in some way, like survival of the fittest, which is not true. It's actually adaptation. So I've centered this work more as a cultural adaptation to be able to integrate these perspectives that existed outside of the realm of supremacy, outside of the realm of patriarchy, so that women and minorities and other people whose lenses have been systemically excluded from having participation or voices or legitimacy have that they can have that in their communities. And that's the implications that I'm stepping into and saying yes to. In terms of the work the grant with the FairShares Commons, I think it's incredibly important for cross-pollination to exist as a culture, so that it's not something that's prescriptive, so that it's not something that you're saying you're wrong or you need to do this, or, you know, it's not condemnatory, but it's more so happening out of, like, I think of it like music, like jazz. Somebody is over here playing the piano and somebody over here is on stand-up bass doing this, and someone over here is doing this sort of thing. And the more that each of us can step into playing each of our parts, then we can sort of create this ecosystem of collaboration that can take on its own quality of the whole song of us. So I'll just end there, but thank you so much for listening and for, yeah.
Great, thank you for that, Amber. I'll wrap everything up in a moment. I just want to put one brief thought in, and we can pick up after the formal end in deeper discussion. In nature, there's a place for the crocodile and the buck, for the parasite and everything else. And part of our approach with the FairShares Commons incorporation is to change the entire game so that the sharks, the crocodiles, the bucks, the parasites have a role to play in terms of making the whole system work long term. So I put that in as a closing thought from myself in response, David, to what you were saying, that may be the route to bring the two opposing camps in your meeting back into a dialogue. So to wrap things up briefly, please follow Jack and myself on Twitter and LinkedIn. Those are our handles up there. Everybody on the webinar will be added to our mailing list, and the next webinar is on the 28th of September at 1800 CEST. For our various workshops, head off to the website, www.evolute6.com. Soon we'll be running a foundation course, which will go into more depth on the background theory behind everything we're dealing with. The FairShares Commons incorporation workshop, we will be launching another one soon. And our flagship program that is coming up is for people who are in the middle of a career who want to make a transition into the startup world, the regenerative startup world, on the basis of the business model that we're describing in the book. And that mid-career transition program will be starting up the first bridging courses in Q3 and starting up the startup university itself next year. So tell your friends about the book, take a look at previous webinars on YouTube. And from my side, thank you very much to everybody for having participated in this formal part of the webinar. Thank you very much, Amber, for everything you brought in, which I found beautifully complementary to what Jack and I are up to. And I've really loved the dialogue that has emerged between the two arenas. And Jack, over to you for a couple of seconds of closing words.
He just said that he was taken away on an emergency call.
Right.
In the chat, just to...
Okay, thank you for that. Right, so Jack has been taken away on an emergency call. So let's say that now concludes the formal part. And from now on, it's an open free for all, whatever your preference is. Either we are sitting in a cafe, you have a nice double espresso and a puppy or two to play with, or we're sitting in a nice bar somewhere and you have your favorite tipple in front of you and a dartboard somewhere off in the background. And we can go into, continue discussing for as long as people want to chat. So open space for anybody to bring in anything, say anything. And for those who want to leave, thank you very much for being with us for this conversation, and hope to see you next time.
Thank you, thank you, thank you.
I just wanted to say that I really appreciated the presentation and the discussion, and found it interesting how the different perspectives and points of view even all of those of us with like-minded aspirations had difficulty seeing from, like, I was actually called out as you're wrong, Tom, when I posted something about conscious businesses moving in the right direction. And I think from my point of view, we need to really learn to accept all perspectives and work with all systems as well as creating new systems.
Yes, I very much relate to that. And the two thoughts come to mind. The first one is chapter 9 is all about the different forms of thought that we can use. Post-logical or post-binary logic forms of thought. And very few people develop sufficient fluidity in those forms of thought to really grasp the challenges we're dealing with and see the various options for addressing those challenges. And one of my favorite forms of thought in there is frames of reference. Every time we evaluate something, every time we say good, bad, whatever the evaluation is, we're always comparing against some internal frame of reference or yardstick. And if we're making comparisons without actually being conscious of our internal frame of reference, we're unable to see how our frame of reference might be invalid for the evaluation we're trying to make. So developing this capacity to see our internal frame of reference whenever we judge something or evaluate something. And I think this is very relevant to the conversation you were describing, David. If people were clearly aware of their individual and collective frames of reference, it opens up much more space to dialogue. And the second thought I want to put in, one of my favorite authors, Douglas Adams, one of the things that he said, which was a core principle of his life, he said, nobody is entitled to their opinion. You have to earn your opinion. And I think that that's a very powerful principle to act from. If we have different opinions, it's pointing at differences in how we create reality, our different frames of reference. And it's too much of a cop-out to say, well, let's agree to disagree. I have a right to my opinion. You have a right to your opinion. Well, yeah, that's a cop-out because there's so much richness in our differences of opinion. And if we really dive into that, we may well learn something transformational, especially if we don't cling to that binary logic of, well, I have a right to my opinion, regardless of what it may be. Mike, you have your paw in the air.
Thank you, Graham. So I have question. I think I read in your book that you're a fan of CDF by Otto Lasker, and I was keen to hear whether you know the model of hierarchical complexity by Michael Commons, and like how would you, because of what you're saying is basically it really leads into the listening, right? And how we're going to listen and be able to understand the whole contextual reality, right? And in some way there are certain, I would say, assessment tools or you know, whatever you want to call them, to help you as well to understand where the person is coming from, you know, in terms of the narrative and cognitive development. And so I just wanted to hear you out on that, and whether you looked into Michael Commons' hierarchical complexity as well, and how you think that.
So a couple of short answers is no, I'm not aware of Michael Collins, and however the name hierarchical complexity triggers various associations in me. Everything that we're doing is deeply inspired by Otto Lasker's constructive developmental framework. And part 3 of the book describes CDF, how it works and how you can put it into practice for yourself, in dialogue in organizations, all around dealing with the first two layers here, the first two strata. So that's deep in it. And in a sense, within these 6 strata, there is a hierarchy of complexity. Actually, there are multiple hierarchies of complexity. You could say this is at the most complex level, or that is at the most complex level, depending on which lens you're looking at it through. Would you be willing to say a couple of words about hierarchies of complexity and that work that you were referring to? And then I'd love to hear, Catherine Alexandra, I see your hand is up, and I'd love to hear what you would like to bring in after Mike has finished.
Yeah, I mean, the guy's name is Michael Commons, Commons, I think it is. And it's really a model which is very much based on mathematical analysis, and I'm new to this as well myself. So hence I was hoping that you would talk to it. But I'm trying to like compare these models and then how Keegan's Piaget things were developing and versus some of these mathematical approaches. So it was really just to hear you out, and because as I said, I kind of came into this through the meta-modern Hansi Freinacht kind of community, and they refer to that. So since I'm quite new to it, just wanting to hear you on that. But what the 6 points that are behind you, like this quadrant view, but that you expand on it. I mean, it was so genius and so simple, because even if you consider the 4 quadrants, but you don't then go on the level of the company, the incorporation, you're missing out such a huge piece, right? And so it was like when so again, congrats on that. But unfortunately, I won't be able to speak to the detail of the MHC because I'm not yet proficient enough.
Well, thank you very much for bringing Michael Commons' work in. It's certainly new to me, and I would love to dive a bit deeper into that. So I will take a look at that.
I will as well.
Nora Bateson too, for complexity.
Yes, Nora does some really good work. Catherine, I see your hand up. Would you be willing to come in?
I have the question I have is, I would like to hear you talk about the relationship of identity to point of view.
Could you say a bit more context around your question?
Well, for me, from a systems perspective, it's identity. The identity of a living system is sort of the context from which that system functions. And when we're talking about human living systems, are the understanding that people have of their identity versus new information and how that impacts their identity can impact whether they're open, even hearing, engaged, or reactive versus responsive, all that kind of stuff. So I'm curious to see how you see point of view as connecting to a person's or to a living system's identity, and how that, I mean, it seems to me like that could be actually a lever into self-awareness, but I'd like to hear your points of view.
Is it open to Graham or just to myself or to anybody, or it's to Graham, right? Or
well, yeah, I mean, it's we're in a discussion, I think. So
yeah, we're in an open discussion. I certainly have lots to say about that, and it's a whole thread running through the entire book. But Amber, I would be very curious to hear what you have to say. I sense that you wanted to engage on that.
Yeah.
Sure, yeah. I often say that we're stepping into the beginning of the beauty of our differences and the end of our indifference. it's not possible to have inclusion in a system that is passive, in the full meaning of the term inclusion. If a system is still ultimately systemically supremacist based, you're just being included into supremacy. So it has to be an alchemical process inclusion. It's a generative alchemical process. This wonderful man, Bayo Kumalafe, says that the work of social justice is not work that you can do, but it's a field that you can be a part of. It's this field that we come into and we leave. It's this constant arc that will always be defined by each generation of defining more and more and more harmonious ways of relating to each other. I think that having the inclusion of more lenses in a way that those lenses can then inform and impact and shape power such that it is held laterally is a powerful act. That's why I say that it's the end of indifference, that indifference can be out-modeled by the beauty of our differences, by each of our lenses showing up fully in who we know ourselves to be. I, for one, have a unique lens in being a mixed race, indigenous, bisexual woman. So I get what you're describing, and there's some aspects of identity politics that I'm still learning and figuring out about and confused by in some way, and seeing how it can be weaponized. But I'm also seeing that other things can be weaponized in every sort of way. So is it a human thing of unprocessed trauma showing up, or is it just what it is being weaponized? And how can we see things for what they are and the value of what they are, and seeing how people show up in the world to manipulate those things? So yeah, that's a lot of words. I don't know if that answered.
Isn't weaponizing though really a function of fear?
Yes, and if people have unrecognized, unprocessed trauma or patterns or harm that have not been dealt with, and they show up in spaces. I've seen this happen with teal organizations or holacracy, or not holacracy, sociocracy, where they've like weaponized sociocracy because it's still been in hierarchical patterns. It's definitely a fear-based action that has not been processed. So, and I don't mean to deviate from it. I'm just saying that some people, their hackles raise at times when they hear the term, identity politics or something, and that's because it may have been weaponized. That's all.
I would maybe just like to add very, very, very quickly with that, and I really appreciate your question, Catherine. I think this is very, very critical. The notion of identity is very, very, very much related with connectedness and also trust. This is something that, as Graham mentioned, it is a major theme in our book, but it's also, maybe if there is anything that I lament that maybe we needed to pick up on, it is this. And I should mention a little bit, because I mentioned this in the book, that I am gender fluid. And what does identity mean? I don't know. Do I have one identity or dozens of them? What does this mean? I don't know if I could give a good answer, but it is something that I would argue is very, very critical. And maybe this could be a focus of a future webinar.
I think that could well be a focus of a future webinar. Maybe one that we do in concert with the launch of your novel, Jack. Jack is coming to the tail end of getting a novel into publication as well. So he's not only a good economist, he's also a good novelist.
And Catherine, that's the major theme of my novel.
Yes. So
I think fear is such a lever, and it just skews things so quickly, and fear is so tightly tied to identity. Whenever that boundary is touched and people aren't comfortable or familiar or conscious of it, that reactive state just sets people off, and it makes it really hard to, you have to deal with that before you can deal with anything else. because it sets off such a reaction, such a bunch of ripples that it makes it really confusing to deal with anything else.
Absolutely.
And rarely do I see that as something that people consciously engage in or really include as part of how they work with others. There's sort of just an assumption that it will be handled or that it doesn't exist. And then you get bit by it when it does show up, you know?
So,
what I've heard about the analogy of fear and what it is has helped me process it. And I just would love to share that. I feel really called to share that. So if our normal innate way of being, think of it like a hose with water moving through it. So well-being, you know, joy, love, all of that, that's water moving through the hose. Fear is when the hose gets kinked. It's the pressure of, it's not the antithesis of it. It's the same energy of love, of well-being, of your connection to source, of your connection to life that gets cut off. And what you're sensing is the pressure of that resistance point. And so just like, oh, here right now, oh, let's just let that go. That's not reality. That's not the truth. It's you're experiencing the pressure of the mistruth of the kink in the hose. So
fear is false evidence appearing real.
I like that one. Coming back to your original question, Catherine, you know, the identity of a living system is, I forget exactly what you said, but it's something like the place from where it functions. And the whole question of identity, as Jack said, is a theme that really runs through the entire book. One of the central themes of the book, in fact, is that we need to look at organizations as living beings. In other words, living systems that are also sentient and have meaning-making capacity. And so to what you were saying, Amber, I've also seen how easy it is to weaponize many well-intentioned practices like sociocracy, holacracy. I've seen organizations blow up completely because the identity, the stories of identity of certain powerful people in the organization ended up using these as weapons of protection, primarily as weapons of protection that ended up being perceived by others as weapons of attack. And so that whole theme of where does my identity come from? And the central thesis in the book is that we all run off meaning-making templates that we've constructed through the course of our life, that we use to attribute meaning to something that's happening to us or to a situation we're in. And in that sense, I'm intrigued by your question of the difference between identity and point of view, and whether point of view gives you a lever to enter into identity. I would say yes. And I would also say, I know that I haven't fully understood what you're getting at, and we would probably need to sit down with diagrams and a deep conversation to really get at it. But the ground pattern that we have in the book, which is derived from Otto's CDF, from Keegan's immunity to change, from nonviolent communication, and a few other things, a big part of that is to use our current point of view on something as a door into a deeper understanding of how we have constructed our identity, so that we can run experiments to reconstruct our identity. And the last thing I'll put in, another of the themes running through the book, which spans, in chapter 6, 6.4 and 6.5, we're pointing at a fundamental misunderstanding in economics and business approaches to understanding probability. They fundamentally get it wrong. And the same logic also applies to human beings. our identity lies inside our own internal reality generating system. And we would say our identity is built up out of our entire life path up until now and our expectations of our life path going forwards. And in section 11.2, page 261, and then halfway down page 262, we have a paragraph where we point at much of the current discourse around identity is so narrow. It's neglecting the full richness of each individual's entire life path, which is their full identity. And at the end of the day, there is nobody else on the planet that can possibly have the same identity as I have, because nobody else has had the same life path that I've had. So in a really granular level, each of us is truly unique. Nobody is like Jack. Nobody is like me when you really dive into it. And that is part of there's a friend of mine who introduced me to the concept, and this is his big practice in life, the concept of uni-one. That's the space we need to step into, is uni-oneness, where we can each show up in our full uniqueness without suppressing any part of ourselves to fit in. And if all of us are showing up in our full uniqueness, then we have a much bigger common oneness that we all stand on. And if our common oneness is really strong and big and inclusive, then we're able to show up in our individual uniqueness. So I see the topic you brought in, Catherine, as a very big, very rich topic that is, it would admit years of discussion.
Actually, and I know we're running out of minutes. Let me just mention one thing very, very quickly. And I think it's the 19th century thinking that constricts us into only one identity. Yeah, we have multiple identities.
Mhm.
And there's nothing wrong. It's the 19th century thinking that constricts us to say, well, I'm either A or B.
Right.
I'm not able to be both. So that's also another dimension. But anyway, I agree with Graham. This is rich, 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 rich.
Yes, exactly. Yeah,
We are diamonds with many facets.
Yes, exactly. One of the central business theses of our approach in business is that by doing these first four strata well, we can make the impossible normal. We can have businesses that are both highly regenerative, positive impact outcomes, and financially profitable. It's not either or, they're two separate axes. And in this sense, one of the conversations I often have with people is, why do we see male and female as two end points on one line where you have to be somewhere in the middle? What if they're two completely independent axes, like particle and wave in physics, where maybe somebody can be simultaneously 80% male and 80% female? And this again is pointing at how our frames of reference tend to limit us or open us up. If we see identity as either or, a single axis, and you have to be here or halfway in the middle, or if you see them as two independent dimensions and you can be anywhere in this entire space, those two frames of reference, the kind of paths you can see to move forwards to address your challenge opens up enormously as soon as you see something as two completely independent variables. David, I see your hand has been in the air for a while. I'm happy to continue going if we have more richness of discussion. And I recognize we've now been 2 hours in the Zoom meeting, so some people may be getting exhausted. Feel free to say cheers and drop out when you want to. But David, if you would like to say something.
Well, first of all, thank you. I wanted to say thank you to Amber and to you for the thoughtful response to what I was trying to raise, which all feels quite good and congruent to me. I guess I'll just throw a couple of additional thoughts in here. One is to this, and very much in line with the questions that have been raised about identity. Much of my background is in community organization. And so the tension between what people are able to accomplish in intentional and contextualized situations versus more mainstream, transactional, and so on is ever present in much of my work. And so another quick story, Arthur Hall, the drummer and humanistic psychology advocate, avatar, has a story he relates of when he had reached a certain level in doing drum circle somatic work in the human potential movement, getting corporate invites that led him to Canada's SAC partner at the moment they went to DEF CON 3, 4, and he was supposed to be doing a training exercise with all these military folks. And it turned out it was not an exercise, it was a real alert at the beginning of the first Gulf War. To which the commander said, well, this seems like a great time to have a drum circle and training exercise, let's go. Now, that's fun, and Arthur was, he did the best he could in that situation to get people in touch with body and feeling and self and consequence of action and so on. And yet, nonetheless, of course, in many ways, what that did is reinforce systems of supremacy, capacity to engage in the consequences of the last 30 years, right? So, this is, and we all have stories like this, that's just somewhat dramatic, of the ways in which, as you were talking about sociocracy and other things get weaponized, co-opted, turned to ends other than our intentions. So I guess I want to read more into your book. I have only glanced through, Graham. So that's on me, and thank you for this introduction. And similarly, Amber, with your work. I am curious about something I worked with automated mediation systems in the 80s that has resurfaced a lot now as people begin to use avatars, and resurfaced as well in relation to sustainability process work, which is the degree to which the complexity of our identification can be represented metaphorically in discussion in ways people get it quickly. Alan Atkinson, who did Sustainable Seattle and is a sustainability consultant, used to point out that the use of salmon as the symbol for what it would take for Seattle to become sustainable was a wonderful metaphor for people to engage in, because it led to the indigenous roots of the region, because it led to an understanding of ecosystems and the peak relationships of both the economy and the ecology of the region. And on the other hand, he said, what we've gotten very good at using sustainability measures is measuring how far and how fast we are going away from sustainability. So again, these are tensions. I'm not suggesting that you've figured this out, or I have, or any of us, but to the degree that your methods incorporate ways for people to become more conscious of these assumptions and more capable of doing contextual communication, of doing somatic and mythical work, naming that and raising it to a level where mainstream communities can engage with it, that strikes me as challenge, and I'm wondering, and necessity at this point. And I'm wondering how you see people engaging this who are not familiar with this language and framework, who haven't come through particular struggles that we may identify with, who are, let's just call it, quote, just mainstream folks who don't use all this language and frame, when they encounter your methods, or when you attempt to bring folks into these discussions, what are the salient, the best attractors, your best experience for people to relax into exploring this as opposed to reacting against it?
It's an excellent question, David. In the famous words of Facebook, it's complicated.
Here, thank you.
Yeah, it's what I've found is when I engage with somebody in this arena, the best route to engage with somebody is to figure out what's important to them and find out what I can say to them, which is one reason why I pointed out just after you first asked the question that a big part of what we're talking about here is building ecosystems that work across multiple generations. And so, we recognize that if we look at nature, if some alien flew past in their spacecraft and zapped Earth with some kind of death ray that eliminated immediately all parasites, what would happen to the Earth's ecosystem? And my sense is that nature needs parasites to function. If we eliminated all parasites, probably the entire natural ecosystem would collapse within a year. They're only parasites from the perspective of what is being eaten or killed or whatever by the parasite. The parasite's perspective is not that it's a parasite. It sees itself as a viable living organism. And the science fiction story I'm thinking of, just to put a bit more context into this, was about a spacecraft that flew over the planet. I think it was from a comic book cartoon series. Flew over the planet, recognized that the dominant life form on the planet was infected by an internal parasite and decided to be enormously helpful by immediately killing off all of these internal parasites. At which point all of the cars driving around on the planet stopped moving because their drivers had been eliminated. It was the human being that was perceived as the parasite and the car as the dominant life form. So, in that sense, if I'm talking to a mainstream investor who is either as a person only interested in making more money, or perhaps as a representative of the pension fund, and they are mandated to really focus in on generating a positive financial return on money invested to take care of pensions in the future, then I'll go in and emphasize very simply that if we incorporate businesses as entire ecosystems, incorporated as a FairShares Commons, it gives you far better capital preservation. It eliminates most of the sources of capital wastage in a business. And so it gives them significantly better financial returns. And oh, by the way, it also gives you really healthy impact outcomes, ESG, regenerative, and all of the rest. Whereas if I'm talking to somebody who is more in the space of how do we generate community values, values-based leadership, and all of that, I'll talk about how the way we currently incorporate prevents values-based leaders from actually bringing their values fully to the surface in a fully safe way, and the limitations that that has on values-based leadership. So for me, it's very much one of, this is somewhat akin to back in the days, for those of us who are old enough to actually have used a telephone that has a rotary dial, where dialing a number actually has a physical meaning for you. You know, if Steve Jobs back then had tried to communicate what the smartphone was about, he would have had to say something completely different to each different interest group. Basically, he would need to describe each app on an iPhone separately to everything else, because the iPhone as a whole at that point was something completely unbelievable and part of science fiction. It could not work. And I think we're a bit in the same place now. When we're talking about a complete system rebuild, we need to figure out for each individual, what is the door that can open to enable dialogue, and then go in through that door. David, that was a bit of a long answer to your question. Have we touched your question? Is there more behind it? Where do we go from here?
Thank you, and of course, there's always more. But yes, thank you, and I guess Amber, if you have any thoughts on this, it would be welcome. I'll say I mentioned the automated mediation work we did. This was with some systems folks way back when. But part of what was interesting about that was trying to understand how to represent the multiplicity and fluidity of identity in somewhat rigorous terms, in terms of psychological models of dissociation and so on, and then to imagine how we could provide prompts for people to consider their own dissociation as they engaged in group process. So that's all a fairly formalized way of saying something like, how do we listen to ourselves and each other and pass talking sticks gently? Anyway, further thoughts would be welcome, and I want to respect the time and say I do appreciate this opportunity to be introduced to you all. Thanks.
Wonderful.
Sure. Yeah, I'd love to hop on that, and then I've actually got to hop off myself. Yeah, so for the work that I'm proposing, it's not that I would even show people everything that you saw. I'm also interested in having community spaces, the Tender Heart Principle, and Empathy Incubator, and regenerative education together. So their first impression wouldn't be technology, it would actually be experiences where they're fully in their body. Because so much about the how do I say it? Trying to describe something might be insufficient description. It's more so about creating nests where impressions can take place, where people can have experiences of belonging and connection, whether that's eating food or being in a space where they can decompress, being in a space that it lends itself to everything from working to arts to healing arts to dining together, but to create a plethora of experiences and impressions where they get to connect to others. That would be the first. It would be the first sort of impressions, which wouldn't be something that I would do, but it's something that their local community would be able to offer.
Wonderful.
Amber, if you're really interested in education and education change, I would strongly recommend a book called Seed and Spark. It's on Amazon. It's truly beautiful. And there's a whole community that's been meeting for about a year to explore that. And most of the people are educators, some with incredible experience, lots of new kinds of schools being created all over the world that are focused on this. And to my knowledge, most of them are earth-centered. because it's truly understanding how the planet works that keeps us centered and connected. So I would highly recommend that.
Seed and Spark, beautiful.
Yep. Yeah, it's on Amazon. You can actually download the PDF. I'm not sure where to tell you to do that. You can, if you want to contact. Yeah, but it's a lovely book. It's just infused with systems understanding and very lyrical.
I missed the name of the book, Catherine.
Seed and Spark.
Seed and Spark. Thanks.
And you can see the regenerative education program concept on my website. It's under Confinity. So it's more of a curatorial nest, so that you can look at these different types of educational models, whether they're, you know, the forest schools in Finland or Waldorf or Reggio Emilia or project-based learning or STEAM, whatever it is, a local pod can curate that. Anyways, I've got to hop off now, but thank
Wonderful.
you so much.
Thank you, Amber. We've loved having you with us.
And I have to go.
Amber, it was really great. I appreciate it. You have a great way with words.
Thank you so much.
Yes, wonderful.